The term deep state is almost a little tired because it was so conspiratorial for so long, but it's a really like effective term for it. Deep politics, deep state, the unelected government, whatever you want to call it. I think now every American left and right has had enough examples of that affecting their side and their issues.
So recently, Ian Carroll went on the Digital Social Hour podcast to talk about the deep state, what that truly means, and why a lot of our conceptions about what the deep state is, even among dissidents, might not be exactly accurate. So I wanted to hear what he had to say. Let's watch and let's react.
Our technology infrastructure is not an accident. It was grown out of money by money. From Google to Apple to Microsoft is a great example with Bill Gates. Holy shit, that dude. Straight up to our social media too. So
the CIA has a lot more power than people think.
Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, I use the CIA as kind of the catch-all term for all intelligence agencies because for the average person, they don't know like all the other names of like all 35, whatever. I don't even know how many intelligence agencies we have, and I bet we have ones we aren't told about. I don't know, but I just say the CIA is in our intelligence state, whether it's NSA or DOD or CIA or whatever it is. And a lot of it is CIA, a lot of it is FBI, you know. And a lot of it, I think that they wouldn't even be able to identify exactly who is who because that's the whole point is that it's very gray area so that it can kind of get covered up and swept under the rug. I mean, a lot of it is done by non-government organizations like USAID, this whole USAID scandal, specifically so that when something gets found out, it's like, oh, that was just some private company making decisions on their own. Like we didn't, it's like, oh, Facebook was censoring you until Facebook shows the records that show that actually the government was pressuring us, which should not exempt Facebook from liability for censoring Americans over facts.
Right.
But
this is a really interesting point. I think he's totally right here. My conception of the U.S. deep state has always been the unelected bureaucracy that exists regardless of electoral outcomes. It's just kind of a catch-all explanation of what it is. But I think Ian correctly notes that it's more of a cartel. It's more of a collaboration between private and governmental bureaucracies to do things that would be illegal if it was just the government doing it purely. So if the government wasn't involved in it, this is a way to kind of obfuscate their responsibility for the censorship regime, a lot of the stuff that happened with, like the COVID stuff and the lockdowns. Well, it's just a private company, right? That's what the entire political establishment said. But it turns out that government was in bed coercing and influencing these organizations to do their will.
It certainly also passes blame on to the government that pressured them to do so.
So crazy. I remember when deep state was a conspiracy theory.
I know, right? And
5 years ago.
The term deep state is almost a little tired because it was so conspiratorial for so long, but it's a really like effective term for it. Deep politics, deep state, the unelected government, whatever you want to call it. I think now every American left and right has had enough examples of that affecting their side and their issues that I hope that Americans en masse are waking up to the fact that it's not lefts versus rights. Like that's two wings of the same bird and both are manipulated. And there's this growing center mass of center left and center right libertarians and rational liberals that all understand that like, yeah, we disagree on policies, but we are all on the exact same team of we're all on the bottom and outside of this club, trying to free our country from these monetary influences. And our enemy is these people on top. And I'm not saying our enemy is rich people. Like we need rich people on our team. Our enemy is corrupt people, right? People that are getting rich and fat on this corrupt deep state system. Yeah. That is what we need to take on. So.
Yeah, certainly so. The classic dichotomy between left and right becomes more muddled every day, especially when you had people like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. essentially join the Trump administration, both of which come from the left. But really, the whole political kind of dichotomy that I think dissidents, anti-war activists, libertarians look at is one between liberty and tyranny. And the cultural war issues that divide us are tangible. They do, have some semblance of, importance to a lot of people, even including myself. But that is the wedge that is driven to divide us against things that Americans would generally be against. Americans were very against, even on the left and the right, the Occupy movement and the Tea Party movement were very against the TARP bailouts that happened after the 2007, 2008 economic collapse. But shortly after those kind of movements formed up, you saw the use that of these woke terminology and injecting kind of the woke culture battle into the sphere of journalism just explode. You can do a LexisNexis search and find out that, you know, words associated with those things grew in popularity immensely. Racism, sexism, trans, gender ideology really exploded after that point. And I think it was intentional. It was to drive wedges between people that otherwise would align. And I think Ian is right here.
I wonder if there's a fix for this, because I'd imagine if it's happening here, it's happening almost every government, right?
Absolutely. And that was the point I was trying to make on Rogan, is that like Israel is just as vulnerable to this as every other country. Sudan is just as vulnerable as every other country. I mean, some countries are certainly more vulnerable, like the more impoverished, the more corrupt, the more histories of power struggles. Certainly you're more vulnerable to it, but like we don't live in a nationalist world anymore. Like the moment that you had steam engines and ships sailing across the world, we were globalized, and that's been going on for hundreds of years. And at this point, this whole oligarchical class of billionaires, of corporate executives, of intelligence operatives, all of those things are operating on a international scale. They are not tied to any one nation. And I think that's why there's so much pushback against nationalism, and they try to smear nationalism as like, oh, so you're a Nazi? It's like, no, that is a completely different thing. Nationalism is pride in America in this sense, or if you were French, it'd be pride in France. And there's nothing wrong with that, because if you don't have nationalism, you have one homogenous soup of people that have no cultural differences, that have no, like, diversity is only our strength if we keep it diverse.
Right.
And you only keep it diverse if you keep that culture to being that culture and that culture being that culture. And like, yeah, we should mingle and we should be friends, but we want British nationalism. We want American nationalism. We want like Lebanese nationalism. And as long as it's not violent, and as long, well, sometimes it super is,
Yeah.
but as long as it's not violent, and as long as it's not, you know, harming others, it's like the golden rule applies to individuals and the golden rule applies to nations. And hopefully we are starting to wake up to the fact that like, we just need to be calling out the violence. We need to be calling out the extremists, because often we're learning those extremists are actually fucking plants put there by the deep state. Like often, whether it's a political protest that there's feds inside of trying to instigate violence to discredit that movement, get people arrested, or whether it's entire countries like Ukraine where there's an entire opposition party being funded and then they coup the country in 2014 in the Maidan Revolution, that's funded by the CIA. We funded that overthrow. Same with Bashar al-Assad in Syria right now. It's just breaking that Syria is just like totally just Muslim extremism, murdering Christians in the streets. And Candace Owens, like last year, said, hey, if we overthrow Bashar al-Assad, he's not great, but he's been protecting the religious diversity in this country. And if we overthrow him, we are going to see Christians massacred in the streets. And lo and behold, now we are seeing Christians massacred brutally in the streets.
That's exactly what's happened in Syria. He's also totally right about Ukraine. If people aren't aware, I think a lot of my viewers are, but in 2014, USAID funded demonstrations that ended up resulting in a coup against the elected government of Ukraine. The State Department was certainly involved in this. There's a leaked call between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piet, at the time, discussing who had to be part of this new government. So there's definite U.S. involvement in this, funded by USAID, and it's impossible to be denied. I think Ian also makes some points in regard to nationalism versus globalism. It's not exactly a stunning revelation to realize that the oligarchs in America would have more in common with the oligarchs in other parts of the world, including Europe, than they do with American citizens. The globalist impulses are big, and that's just demonstrated by organizations like the WEF and the causes that they put forward. So I'm not as big of an enthusiast about nationalism, I guess, in general as a concept as Ian is. But in the context, when it's nationalism as opposed to globalism, that's what I prefer. But my ideal is, nationalism to the lowest possible unit, all the way down to the individual, where your community is much more important than your state, and your state is much more important than the federal government, and the federal government is more important than a global government.
Crap. And that coup was on behalf of us and Israel, the Western nations' interests in overthrowing that strong leader that was holding that country down and now it's back into chaos again.
Wow. So all of this is just orchestrated.
I mean, yeah, I don't mean to imply that there's like 6 shadowy dudes around a table with the Illuminati sign in the center. That is not at all what I'm implying, but it is orchestrated in the sense that, like, imagine all the giant piles of money that these various groups and people have. Like Bill Gates has his pile of money, the World Economic Forum and their friends have their piles of money, BlackRock has their pile of money, all these different people, and there's governments involved in that too. And all those piles of money represent massive amounts of leverage and influence. And most of them tend to align on most things. Like, most of them do not want a strong, educated, intelligent American populace,
Right.
because it doesn't benefit any of them. Most of them do not want healthy young Americans that are fit and capable and having strong marriages and strong families, because that doesn't benefit any of them. It's like, so on a lot of these issues that feel like some grand conspiracy, you don't need a grand conspiracy because incentives are all aligned. Every one of them makes money if we're all fat and sick and depressed, whether it's because they're selling us drugs, or it's because they're selling us advertising, or it's because they just need us to stay the fuck out of their political process, so they can run their show the way they want.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So it's just interest alignment. Like, the world is what, 8 billion people. So there's 8 billion different people at the table that are influencing the world. But most of us are just regular people that only have one person's worth of influence. And then you get the Bill Gateses of this world that represent like billions of dollars worth of interest, who's like, I'm going to vaccinate all of Africa with these experimental drugs that just so happen to sterilize millions of people against their consent. Or I'm going to test out remdesivir in Africa, and it killed remdesivir, the COVID drug that he pushed on us. It killed more than 50% of the people in this trials.
Holy crap.
It's crazy, dude. The story of remdesivir's trials in 2019, I'm pretty sure it was, maybe 2018. It's crazy what happened in the remdesivir trials in Africa. And I'm pretty sure they were testing it on Ebola, trying to see if it would help for Ebola.
Yeah.
And it was so bad that they had to shut the trials down after a couple months because it was just clearly killing people. And then it became our wonder drug for COVID because they could make a shitload of money off of it. And because it was a treatment after you're so sick you're in the hospital, rather than a preventative that would stop them from having their emergency use authorization. And that information is all sourced and cited in RFK's book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Everyone should read that book.
That is.
Yeah, Ian's right here. A lot of the distant world, and I've kind of, fallen into this at sometimes too, believes that kind of everything that happens that's kind of tyranny or an imposition of coercion or schemes to rob us of our liberty or wealth are part of like a grand conspiracy where there's a boardroom and people kind of discuss it. But I think Ian's right here when he says oftentimes it results just from a happenstance that transpires because of alignment of interests and alignment of incentives that occur that encourage these people to do this without, with kind of a wink and a nod rather than kind of a grand conspiracy to do that. That's not to say that that doesn't happen. It certainly happens, especially when it comes to, launching wars and, the COVID response and stuff. We've certainly seen that. But a lot of it is more or less organic based upon incentives and power structures that revolve around those incentives.
Nice. Yeah, I know he's buying up farmland. He's trying to do fake meat companies.
Yeah, Bill Gates is a madman, and I more and more suspect that it is not just like him being naive and just doing billionaire things. I more and more suspect that it is some sort of, I hesitate to say agenda, but it kind of an agenda.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what it is, but it's fucking evil. It's not good.
Well, this was an interesting video. I think Ian is kind of on the money when it comes to the deep state. He's challenged some of my beliefs about what I've thought that the deep state is, or at least my conception of it. And I'm more and more inclined to believe that the deep state is more of a cartel than it is sheerly a government bureaucracy, because of some of the things he talked about here, is that the government partners with private interests to enact things that would have legal challenges if it was just the government doing it. I don't think that the government could have completely got away with the censorship regime like it did on social media if not for its collaboration with Facebook and with Twitter and with Instagram and all the social media companies back, especially during the lockdowns and the COVID epidemic. So as to remove people's speech that they didn't like or ban certain users. That happened en masse, especially to a lot of the conservative ones. But Again, this has been happening a long time, since essentially the advent of the deep state. It's just more coming to Earth now because of all the fallout of its worst excesses, I think. But let me know in the comments below, how would you define the deep state? What do you think the deep state is? Because I want to hear what you have to say about it. And until next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll see you in the next one.